They say that every cloud has a silver lining. But what if the cloud is a plague that wipes out half the population? Welcome to my channel. And today let's find out how humanity survived the dark legacy of the Black Death. Suggested by many of our viewers, this episode is going to be different from our usual videos about medieval history. Today we are looking at the impact the Black Death had on society. We will examine its consequences, its victims and survivors, and how it changed the course of human history forever. From catastrophe to change, the Black Death reshaped European society more dramatically than any other event before or since. The plague arrived in 3 waves, but its first major outbreak struck in the summer of 1348. Arriving via trading ships from Asia, it rapidly spread across the continent, killing tens of millions in its path. It would rage for another 4 years, peaking in 1350 before finally receding. When it comes to plagues, there are few as infamous as the bubonic plague, which swept through Europe from the mid-14th century and wiped out nearly half of its population. The pandemic was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which can be transmitted by fleas living on rodents. As the disease progressed, it led to swelling of the lymph nodes, fever, chills, and agonizing pain. Death often followed within a week. The initial signs of the plague were not unlike those of the later COVID pandemic, people suffering from a fever and chills, with some developing lesions which turned black and hence the name Black Death. Victims who didn't die were left with permanent scars. Given the lack of effective treatments, the death toll mounted quickly, piling up bodies in the streets and cemeteries. Survivors faced an even grimmer prospect as the plague recurred year after year. Throughout the crisis, fear and uncertainty dominated. Authorities struggled to contain the spread while citizens grappled with the reality of a world irrevocably altered. The social fabric of the communities began to unravel under the strain, leaving an indelible mark on European history. The Black Death unleashed chaos upon medieval life. Its impact went beyond the immediate physical toll, disrupting every facet of daily existence in profound ways. The sudden and massive loss of life had far-reaching consequences. The labor shortage triggered by the plague led to significant changes in the economic and social order, challenging the rigid class structure of feudalism. Peasants and laborers gained bargaining power as their skills became more valuable in a world where fewer people were available to do the work. How the Black Death shattered feudalism and sparked new beginnings. The Black Death fundamentally transformed the social structure of medieval Europe, contributing to the decline of feudalism and the rise of new social dynamics. The devastation wrought by the plague led to a breakdown in the traditional feudal system, which had characterized medieval society since the fall of Rome. Feudalism was an economic and political system based on the exchange of land for military service and loyalty. This arrangement had created a rigid hierarchy with the king at the top, followed by nobles, clergy, and peasants. However, the catastrophic loss of life caused by the plague shook this system to its core. One of the most significant impacts of the Black Death was the dramatic reduction in the population of Europe. Estimates suggest that anywhere from 30 to 60% of the population perished, leaving a profound shortage of labor. This labor shortage had profound implications for the social order. The demand for labor increased, but the supply had been decimated by the plague. Peasants and laborers found themselves in a position of power as their services became more valuable in a world where fewer people were available to do the work. As a result, the rigid class structure of feudalism began to erode. Peasants who had traditionally been tied to the land and subject to the whims of their noble landlords started to demand better treatment and more rights. They sought higher wages, improved working conditions, and greater freedom of movement. In some cases, peasants even abandoned the rural areas where they had toiled for generations and migrated to cities in search of better opportunities. This growing sense of individual worth and collective power laid the foundation for new social dynamics. The Black Death's ripple effect transformed medieval life forever. Beyond its immediate impact, the Black Death had profound long-term consequences for medieval life, shaping everything from religious beliefs to artistic expression. The immense suffering and death caused by the plague shook people's faith in the Church, which had long held significant power and influence in medieval society. The inability of the clergy to stop the plague or provide solace to the dying contributed to a decline in religious authority and the emergence of new spiritual movements. One notable example was the flagellant movement, which involved groups of lay people who, believing that God was punishing them for their sins, subjected themselves to harsh penances and marches across Europe. Another significant ripple effect was the shift in artistic themes and motifs. The Black Death inspired a surge of macabre imagery, particularly the memento mori, which served as a reminder of the inevitability of death. Artists began incorporating skulls, skeletons, and other symbols of mortality into their works, reflecting the profound impact of the plague on the human psyche. Overall, the Black Death was a watershed moment in medieval history, leaving an enduring legacy that permeated various aspects of life. The social, economic, religious, and artistic landscapes were all profoundly affected by the plague, setting the stage for major transformations in European history. Surviving the plague. Lessons from the Black Death's impact on society. Surviving the Black Death was a testament to resilience, adaptation, and sometimes sheer luck. In the face of such a devastating pandemic, individuals employed various strategies to protect themselves, their families, and their communities. One crucial lesson from this period is the importance of public health measures. Even though medieval understanding of disease transmission was limited, practices like quarantining the sick and isolating the infected helped to slow the spread of the plague, as did closing down public spaces and avoiding large gatherings. These measures, though rudimentary, foreshadowed the quarantine and social distancing strategies employed centuries later to combat infectious diseases. Moreover, the value of hygiene cannot be overstated. While basic sanitation was lacking in medieval cities, some survivors recognized the connection between cleanliness and health. Simple acts like regular hand washing and the use of disinfectants, though not always effectively practiced, were seen as ways to ward off infection. Additionally, the importance of nutrition and overall health became apparent. Those who were well-nourished and in good health were better equipped to withstand the ravages of the plague. Encouraging a balanced diet and promoting healthier lifestyles emerged as a critical strategy for boosting the community's resistance to disease. The Black Death turned point in medieval society. The Black Death, while incredibly devastating, acted as a pivotal turning point in medieval society, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. Before the plague, Europe was deeply entrenched in feudalism, a system that had defined social relations for centuries. But the massive social upheaval brought about by the plague challenged this old order. The labor shortage empowered the lower classes, shaking the foundations of feudalism and paving the way for new economic and social structures. This transformation was not immediate, but the seeds of change were sown. The Black Death also significantly impacted religious fervor and intellectual thought. The plague's devastation shook people's faith in the church and prompted a re-examination of religious doctrines and practices. Furthermore, the increased value placed on human life led to calls for reform and a questioning of long-held beliefs. The Black Death thus played a role in shifting the intellectual and spiritual landscape of medieval Europe, contributing to the emergence of new ideas and movements that would shape the course of history. In essence, the Black Death served as a catalyst for profound transformations in medieval society. It shattered the existing social norms, religious certainties, and economic structures, creating conditions for new ideas, social dynamics, and ways of thinking to take root. This period of transition and change set the stage for the Renaissance and the Age of Exploration, marking a significant departure from the medieval world that came before. Shattered lives. How the plague altered Europe's social fabric. The Black Death's impact transcended mere statistics. It tore apart families, communities, and the very fabric of medieval society. Entire communities were wiped out, leaving behind a haunting silence where bustling towns once stood. Survivors were left grappling not only with their own grief, but also with the disintegration of the social bonds that had defined their lives. The plague's indiscriminate nature meant that no one was truly safe. The rich and powerful were not immune to its deadly grip. However, their elevated status did afford them certain advantages. Wealthy individuals could afford to flee to the countryside or isolate themselves in grand manor houses, while the poor often suffered the most. Overcrowded living conditions in cities and poverty made it harder for them to escape the plague's wrath. The Black Death exacerbated existing social tensions and inequalities, exposing the harsh realities of medieval life. From plague to progress, the unforeseen changes after the Black Death. The aftermath of the Black Death brought about significant and often unforeseen changes that reshaped medieval society in profound ways. The most immediate consequence was a profound shift in demographics. The staggering loss of life caused by the plague led to a drastic reduction in population, which had wide-ranging implications for the social, economic, and political landscape. The labor shortage that resulted from the plague had a significant impact on the economy. With fewer people available to work, the value of labor increased, giving rise to new economic opportunities and challenges. Peasants and laborers found themselves in a position of power as their services became more valuable. This shift in the balance of power contributed to the decline of feudalism and the rise of new social dynamics. Furthermore, the Black Death had a profound impact on religious and cultural norms. The devastation wrought by the plague shook people's faith in the church and religious authorities. The inability of the clergy to stop the plague or provide solace to the dying led to a decline in religious authority and a questioning of traditional beliefs. This shift in religious fervor paved the way for new spiritual movements and reforms. The Grim Reaper's legacy: lasting effects of the Black Death on culture. The Black Death cast a long shadow over medieval culture, leaving an indelible mark on art, literature, and society as a whole. The experience of the plague and the constant threat of its recurrence permeated various aspects of medieval life, shaping cultural expressions and beliefs. One of the most prominent legacies of the Black Death is the macabre imagery that permeated medieval art and literature. The image of the skull became a recurring motif, serving as a reminder of the inevitability of death. Artists depicted skeletons and hourglasses, symbolizing the fleeting nature of life. These memento mori reminders were not intended to evoke fear, but rather to inspire reflection on mortality and the need to live life to the fullest. Beyond the visual arts, the Black Death profoundly impacted literature. Writers incorporated themes of death, decay, and the fragility of human existence into their works. The works of Geoffrey Chaucer, such as the Canterbury Tales, offer a vivid portrayal of life during the plague, capturing the fear, uncertainty, and social disruption of the time. Similarly, the writings of Boccaccio, including the Decameron, reflect the impact of the plague on human relationships, morality, and the search for meaning in the face of suffering. The Black Death shook up medieval Europe like never before, causing serious economic chaos. With so many people gone, there was a huge labor shortage, and that changed everything. Suddenly, there weren't enough workers for farms, factories, and trade. This scarcity drove wages up as employers scrambled to hire anyone available. Peasants and laborers found themselves in a powerful spot, negotiating better pay and working conditions. This shift flipped the power dynamic between bosses and workers, paving the way for the decline of feudalism and the rise of new social structures. It was a game changer for the medieval economy, for sure. The Black Death disrupted long-established patterns of trade and commerce. The massive loss of life resulted in a decline in consumer demand, leading to economic uncertainty and instability. As trade routes were disrupted and markets faltered, merchants and artisans faced financial challenges, leading to shifts in economic activity and the emergence of new trade networks. Moreover, the plague had an impact on the agricultural sector. With fewer people available to work in the fields, agricultural production declined, leading to food shortages and price fluctuations. The disruption of the supply chain and the imbalance between supply and demand resulted in economic hardship for rural communities and contributed to the overall instability of the medieval economy. In conclusion, the Black Death unleashed an economic catastrophe that reshaped the financial landscape of medieval Europe. The plague's impact on labor availability, trade, agriculture, and social structures sent shockwaves through the economy, contributing to profound changes that had lasting implications for medieval society. And that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon to never miss an upload. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Until next time.